Trekcast.
The galaxy's most unpredictable Star Trek podcast.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. With us today, we've got Michael Moore, former Star Trek prop master and prop maker.
Prop maker.
Prop maker, correct. That's right. Prop maker.
On set, taking care of all this stuff.
Okay, prop maker. Yeah. Michael has worked on several Star Trek movies and shows and series, and we're happy to have him here today on this special edition of Trekcast. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Hello, and thank you.
Yeah. So, I heard some of your past interviews, and they were great. One of my first questions, though, I had for you is, how do you define a great prop? What constitutes a great prop?
Well, I look at things from multiple perspectives. In some cases, a great prop is, from a business standpoint, it's something that was really easy to do, but you got a lot of money.
Right.
But as far as from a prop maker standpoint, it's kind of like, were you able to get it to do everything that you wanted? Function the way it's supposed to? Does it look the way it's supposed to? Does it have a good paint finish? When you're looking at certain things like that, you have to look at your time frame and your budget.
Okay.
If you, like, for instance, for Next Generation, DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise, we only had 6 days to build anything. No matter how many there were or how complicated it was 6 days.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally we'd get an extra day because maybe it's a weekend or something. But in general, no. So, and episodic TV, when you first start off a show, the budget's pretty high, and then as you're doing seasons, it comes down and is really low.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas most movie budgets are just what they are. They're movie budgets. So, when they say, oh, we need $10,000 for that piece and $1,000 for that and $50,000 for that, that's put into the budget.
Right.
So there isn't a whole lot of arguments about, $100 or something like that, like on episodic TV.
Right. Okay. So with that in mind, do you have a favorite prop that you had a hand in making?
Well, that's kind of hard because you got to figure I did 7 seasons of Next Generation, 7 seasons of DS9, 7 seasons of Voyager, 5 seasons of Enterprise, and then the different movies from Generation.
Okay, so maybe not like a top favorite, but like highlight ones that you enjoy.
Well, I mean, I enjoy making the alien stuff because, if there's a design, it's like, oh, look, how am I going to make that happen? Whereas if it's, some of the Federation stuff is also still kind of difficult to do, depending on time constraints and so on. Some of the stuff I like personally is when we're given a lot more leeway when they give us a design, if they give us a design. Sometimes it's just a description by the prop master saying, well, it's got to be about the size of this, and I want it to be able to do this, this, and this. Especially on Voyager, when we were having the alien of the week, so they weren't established aliens, unlike Next Gen and DS9. You had your Cardassians, your Klingons, and all these other races that had a history, and we already knew what the design elements were for all those characters. Whereas on Voyager, we would have a new race, come into play in the next episode, and it would be like, oh, okay, well, give us a description of what you want to do. If they don't have a drawing, and in many cases, I would call up the costume designer, Bob Blackman, and say, so what are the colors of this race? What's the aesthetic and stuff like that? I tried to make sure that I, besides talking to the prop masters, but I would also talk with the designers, the illustrators. I would also talk to the costume designer and costume makers to see what colors they were using, so we could all coordinate, so that you don't have a costume that's red and black, and we suddenly have a prop that's silver and blue.
Right.
It doesn't fit into the aesthetic of that race that they've designed.
Yeah. So I've heard you mention about the colors for different aliens in other interviews. So I guess with what you're saying, my question is that level of collaboration common in Star Trek and in other productions, or is that unique to Star Trek, that amount of collaboration?
It depends. Because so I've worked on a lot of different science fiction TV shows.
Right.
Earth 2, God.
I saw Gremlins, which was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So.
But see, that's, as far as science fiction, that's that kind of a horror movie kind of thing, with some science fiction kind of tossed in. But in some cases, yes, some cases, no. It depends on how they've set up the production. And in many cases, is it somebody I know, in wardrobe? Is it somebody I know as the illustrator? So if you know those people, I would automatically give them a call no matter what. Right. If I had a question. And that's the thing, is we had a working relationship with wardrobe already. We had a working relationship with the different designer illustrators for all those shows. So it made it easier, and of course you have a relationship with the prop masters, who are the ones who make the actual decisions with the budget and everything else.
Right.
So in some cases, yes, like I just said, on certain shows, yes, there's a lot of interaction because they want to get it right. Most of the newer shows, okay, this is the thing about it, is most of the newer shows and movies that are coming out, there's a lot more integration for all that. Like all the Marvel stuff, okay, for instance, you have everyone talking to everyone, because the costume is not only going to be more than likely have some CGI effects added to it, but you're also going to have, in some cases, specialty props, specialty costume materials, and you want to make sure everything's, since Marvel is such a large entity as a world, you want to make sure everything's, correct to itself. I don't know if that's making any sense to you, but so they have a lot of communication between all the different departments to make everything the way it's supposed to be. Because there's already.
But is that greater collaboration? Is that because of the new tools that we have to use in production, or is that just a evolution of doing filmmaking now for so long, for about 100 years, that the processes have evolved?
I think that for certain productions and production companies, they're progressing in that direction to make sure that they're making everything to the fullest.
Right.
Whereas older shows did not necessarily do that, because they did not necessarily have the funds to do a lot of stuff that a lot of, now with all the new different programs that you can process your images through for a shot, you can do a whole lot more with a lot less.
Right.
So I think it's really all determined by the individual production and the like it makes, for me, I think it makes my job easier if I can communicate with all the different people to make sure that not only am I getting the prop master what he wants, but I'm getting the costume designer what they want. Because we do things, we on Star Trek, see, we never just worked on just props. We also worked on costumes with the costume department, making specialty fabrics or accessories and all kinds of stuff like that. Okay. So it really just depended on every episode. What if we were just doing props that episode, or we're doing props and some costume pieces, and so on. So it's a it's kind of a jumble. It's like no matter what, we were always dealing with the costume department as well as props, because we also supplied all the communicators that were on Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, blah, blah, blah. So that's one of those things that you really want. For me, it's like everything else outside of the film industry, or so should I say in production, if everybody is cooperating with each other to get a project done, not to get political, but if everybody outside of that would do this, would talk to each other and just work out the problems, none of us would have any problems.
Right. Right.
Now to get back to your question, in reality, of what are some of the props that I enjoyed making, or my favorites. Well, I enjoyed during DS9, Bear Burge and myself redesigned the phaser. I think it was in the 3rd or 4th season, to a what they call the boomerang phaser, which was slightly bent and a little smaller. We did up 4 different samples of that phaser to show production when they wanted to change it, make it a little more ergonomic compared to the Cobra or the Dustbuster, and it was approved. So that was cool. On Voyager and DS9 Voyager / First Contact, one of my business partners, Steve Horch, who's now deceased, he and I designed up the Mark 9-10 tricorder and built that from scratch ourselves, and used throughout DS9, Voyager, First Contact, Insurrection, blah blah blah. All those other shows up until they started changing things again. Right. So those are fun pieces. Other fun pieces were for Voyager, the Captain Proton episodes. Love those episodes because Buster Crab and so on. It was nice to have a little tie back there.
Yeah, those were fun episodes. I enjoy watching those. I was going to ask, you've been in this industry for so long. Was there a film or show that inspired you to get into it?
Well, okay. So I started off in the film industry in horror makeup. That's what I was going to do. I'm going to be be a horror makeup artist.
Right.
Just doing, appliances and so on, which I was doing for a little while. But then I decided, I don't necessarily want to deal with as many people as I was, because if you're doing a zombie movie, you may be making up 50 people in 3 hours. And some of them are going to complain and so on. So I'm like, I don't want to deal with it anymore. So, I've had a lot of jobs in my time. I've worked in aerospace, I've worked in retail. I've done some construction. I've done a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But then it always came back to, I like making things. So that's when I ended up kind of getting more and more into doing the prop side of it. On Masters of the Universe, I was brought in as they were moving forward with Masters of the Universe, and we made 72 suits of armor in 6 weeks, fully, for all the Skeletor troops and stuff. And as things progressed, I was still doing some makeup-y or creature-esque stuff while I was at that same company. And slowly but surely, I started progressing more into more prop-related items and some specialty costumes. I don't know if you know of a TV series for kids called Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future.
Oh, the 80s cartoon.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
It wasn't a cartoon, it was live action.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and they had the toys that you could like click on. Yeah.
The first interactive toys that were ever
made. Right.
So I was one of the people on that doing the promo, and then the partial supervisor for getting the suits done for the actual series. And then I went to Canada to work on set for a while up there, and then came back and started. And during all this, we're also working on Beetlejuice, and we did Munchies, and you name it. Because most shops that are working a lot don't work on one show at a time. They work multiple shows, even if it's like a little tiny, B grade movie with a A-lister movie, that type of thing. So you can end up working when you're at a shop like Robert Short Productions. You can be working on both a A-list movie and a B or C or D movie.
Right.
Just depends on, you could be crossing over every day into both worlds.
And when you're doing something like that, is it that you're doing all the props for that film, or maybe you've been contracted to do a few things, or?
Well, yeah, it depends on the movie,
right,
and the prop master, and so on. So during Next Generation, for instance, there were 2 prop masters. It was Alan Sims and Joe Longo, and they would for most of of Star Trek, they would alternate episodes. So one of them would be shooting a show while the other one's prepping for the show. So back and forth. And that seemed to work out pretty good up until they wanted to start DS9. And DS9 is when Joe Longo went to the new show. Alan Sims finished the remainder of Next Generation. And then, of course, right after DS9 started Voyager. So Alan Sims went from Next Gen to Voyager. So
yeah,
you get kind of on Star Trek. There were probably 4 shops that were being utilized. In general, we had our props that if we were going to continue to make them, we would continue to make them for the show. Like when we started doing, for instance, the boomerang phasers. Well, as soon as the boomerang phaser was done, the Voyager producer decided that he wanted the same new phaser in that show. So we would be making additionals for that stuff, like even including tricorders and so on. So there'd be some overlap with certain shops. and other shops did specialty stuff, that may be like they needed to concentrate on only just doing that particular type of prop because it was more complicated than what the other stuff was. Like if you're going in doing radio control devices, that's a little more involved than doing just some simplistic hand prop that doesn't do anything at all. So, and all the shops did those types of things. So in some cases, if we were doing something more complicated, the prop master would go to one of the other shops and have them do some of the other stuff while we were working on the complicated piece, and vice versa.
Okay. So I was listening to one of your earlier interviews, and you had talked about how during DS9 and Voyager, you guys kind of split up some of the TNG props, and some went to Voyager, some went to DS9, and you had come up with a little bit of a backstory that Voyager was using older tech because the crew was kind of retro and maybe enjoyed the older look and aesthetic. Are those kind of stories common? Like, do you guys come up with those for your own headcanon, or is that discussed? Or
and it comes down to that. Usually it's kind of like, well, what's the budget like?
Right.
So in some cases, and also the other thing you got to think about is when the Voyager went off into the Delta Quadrant, right? Okay. So went off into Delta Quadrant with what it had in technology in the computer. So unless they were designing their own tech, which they were obviously through the whole show, but you'd be limited to what was there unless you're reinventing it yourself. Other things about it is that the way some of the stuff was explained to me is well, every once in a while they'd be able to get a transmission, from Starfleet to the Delta Quadrant, and they data blast. And in many cases, like when some people are like, well, why does this crew have this comm badge and that crew has this comm badge and blah blah. Well, because there are in some cases ships that have specific comm badges for their ship. As far as technology goes, before they left to the Delta Quadrant, they may have had a dump of new tech. But if it kind of falls into that, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
Okay. From the standpoint of that. But if you notice through the show, things started progressing into that. Well, that's a different technology, and this is a different thing, and that's a different thing. One day they're using a Cobra head phaser, and then the next episode they're using a boomerang phaser. And we're not always privy to all that type of information about what's going on. But at the same time, from my standpoint and some others, but some of the fans out there not, is it's still a phaser. What difference does it make?
Right.
Right. Who's to say that they don't have another 30 or 40 different designs lined up for other tech, but they're just not using it because, I
want this one this time or something.
Well, I mean, it's also like the science officer, the captain, and security officer who would be deciding what your tech is. It's like any military situation, is that you have the people in charge who are deciding whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing to use. Some things are more intimidating than others.
Right.
So
Okay.
I tried not to get so much into the technical your reasonings for stuff, because you'll just end up shaking your head half the time, going whatever.
Yeah.
Because I'm not writing the script.
Right.
So in some cases, when they say something in the script, they're going to want to go, oh, well, we have this blah 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 blah, and they're like, well, what's that? You got to give us a better description of it than that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't have a description, that means that the prop master and or the producers and the group and the illustrator come up with a design of that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, or there's no time to go through the process. It needs to be about this big. It needs to do these things, and I want it to look like this. That's it.
Okay.
Because some stuff is they're calling out races that have never been seen before, and you don't even see them in that episode. You just know that this thingy is from the race that's like 100 light years away.
Right. Okay.
So there's no use in arguing with the vision.
Right.
You just, some things you have to let flow to see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I get that. I was going to ask you, so you recently worked on Star Trek Discovery. Yeah. How has it, the props, the making of them, has the technology significantly changed? I know 3D printing is now a bigger thing.
Okay. Well, depending on what you're making,
Okay.
and how much you're making. Like if we were going to make this phaser, okay, we're going to make that phaser in 3D. Okay, so now you want me to make this phaser in 3D. Do you have the 3D drawings for that yet, or is this just a sketch? Okay, do I need to draw it, or my company needs to draw it in 3D and then print it? And how many do you need? You know what I'm saying? So in some cases, it might be faster for me to take a block of Gelliton or MDF or whatever and just make it by hand.
Right.
Because in many cases, there are things like this, okay, that I could probably sculpt and mold faster than somebody's going to draw it in 3D and then print it. Now, if they're really good at 3D, that means that they've also separated all the parts and they're all being printed separately. But depending on what kind of machine you're using to make those parts, you may not be able to actually use the part on set. You may be doing the 3D printed part as your master to make silicone molds and then resin castings or fiberglass or what have you. So it really does depend on that situation. Okay. In many cases, like I said, I can produce the part faster than you can draw it and print it. And you still have to clean up the part once it's printed before it could even go into a mold.
Right. Okay.
And the more people you have involved, the longer it's more complicated and the longer it's going to take to get to the same point. So in some cases, if we have 3 projects that we're trying to do, and we're like, okay, this one's really complicated of how it needs to be assembled. So we're going to 3D print that, but we're going to hand make these other 2. So while we are doing the other 2 pieces, this is printing over here and making a really good, starting block.
Right. Okay. Okay.
In other words, you use the tools that you have to get as close to your deadline as possible.
Right. Right. Okay. I was going to ask. I know that you've worked on a lot of sci-fi and horror.
Yeah.
Is there any other genres of films that you would like to, or TV that you'd like to do that you haven't done yet?
Well, let's see. Okay, so I've worked on Quantum Leap, Star Trek, Space Above and Beyond, SeaQuest, Beetlejuice, Munchies, Ghoulies, Dances with Wolves, Last of the Mohicans, The Hobbit, 1, 2, and 3. Let's see. Did Encino Man. I'm trying to think of the genres.
Yeah. I get what you're doing. I haven't heard of romantic comedy yet.
Lawnmower Man 1 and 2.
Okay.
Yeah, but see, most romantic comedies don't involve a lot of props.
Right.
You know, if they do, they're usually something you can go out and buy or rent.
Okay.
You know, and in some cases, you might have to make a bottle that's rubber so they can throw it at each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I as far as everything else, you know, is I worked on dinosaurs, like I said, Munchies. So I've worked with puppets. I've worked with in science fiction, horror, fantasy. I've also worked on Reanimator. Okay, so I've worked on science fiction, horror, fantasy, historical, fantasy.
Yeah, you've got it covered.
I've worked on a lot of different stuff.
Yeah. Very cool.
So it's kind of like, do I have one that I would like to work on? Sure. If there's another Muppet show, sure, I'd like to work on that.
Okay.
That's
or
my hobby is puppetry. See.
Okay. So the Muppets is a franchise you would like to be a part of. That.
Well, I've already been a part of it in that, working with the Henson Company on dinosaurs.
Right.
But also, I've also been involved in making prototypes for Muppet product.
Okay. Very cool. So my co-host Dan did have a silly question to ask you. So just for fun, he wanted to know what your favorite flavor of Starburst is.
My favorite flavor of Starburst. Well, that's a toss-up between strawberry and the lemon.
Okay. All right.
Depends on what time of the day, you know, what your mood is, you know.
Very cool. The only other question I have for you, I was just curious about this. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But are there any, like, if you see the call sheet and you're like, that actor is going to be messing with my props, and I know they're going to be rough on them, they're either clumsy or it just doesn't work out.
So
you don't have to give a name if you don't want to, but like, do you have people in mind?
Well, you know what? In the end, if they break it, I'll either have to fix it or make another one and make more money.
There you go.
So yeah, there are people that are difficult on props, but at the same time, some of those people that are giving the props a hard time is, in some cases, the prop has failed while they're giving a very long speech. Because depending on the prop, see, like the original Next Gen tricorder, and the third season tricorder, when you put the batteries in, they only lasted for about 15 minutes of being constantly on. So at any given moment, depending on the scene, you could have a scene that the talking goes on for 10 minutes, and you're going to probably shoot that scene 3-4 times depending on how it was delivered. But while you're doing that, if you're not thinking about, hold on, I got to change the batteries, during a sequence when they're holding something, the batteries, the thing could just stop working. Okay. And that happened quite a few times on Next Generation and DS9 before we switched over to the Mark 9-10 tricorders. And during the time that the original ones, Next Gen ones, were made, and the Mark and the third season renditions, which is a Mark 6/7 medical, we were also kind of restricted with the technology that was available at the time. So, lithium batteries were not something that you could readily get. And if you could get them, they were really, really expensive. So if you were using the Mark, the Next Gen first, second season tricorders used a J cell to power them. The third season ones also took a J cell. So that's 9-volt battery. And back then it was very, very easy to get a hold of. And they were if you were buying them in bulk, it cost you $2 a piece. Well, a lithium cell, that would be the same voltage and everything else, which would have lasted longer, but a lithium cell like that would have been $200 for one battery. Right. And you're not going to go out and buy, a dozen $200 batteries, right, for just your props, because everything still has to fit within your budget. Whereas as things progressed, when we got into the Mark 9 and 10, there were new chips that would help regulate and or boost the power. And all the components were more efficient at what they were doing compared to the earlier versions. Earlier versions, a red LED would just suck the power out of the battery, whereas later on, as time went on, the batteries were more equalized in their consumption of power. So there's always that type of thing that a lot of people don't think about. Like nowadays, you can go out and get an Arduino board, which is what a lot of people are using for all their props in fandom. And you can take that Arduino board and program it to do all the stuff that you want it to do. And you'll know, and you can work out how much power it's going to go. So how long is that battery going to last? You can use rechargeable lithiums now, right? Or you can just get lithiums, period. But rechargeable lithiums that also don't take forever to recharge. Because that's the other thing, is we weren't allowed to use rechargeable batteries. We were told not to use rechargeable batteries because, well, you have to put them in something to charge them. So you better have like 20 sets of them if you were going to be on set. Right. And in some cases, there was no way you were going to get a rechargeable battery for that piece that goes on your forehead. That's a little coin cell. And those were originally the only lithium cells you could buy. Right, yeah. Little tiny batteries, the little coin cell batteries. And I remember when we were starting to do the stuff for like that Crusher was using on everybody's forehead during Next Generation, it had batteries on one side and the circuit board on the other, and 2 batteries on this side, so it's 6 volts, but those batteries were $12 a piece for those little tiny batteries.
Right, and you just went through a ton of them.
Yeah. Now you can go to the 99-cent store and buy 6 of them for $1.
Right.
So
right.
it's that type of thing, you know, for budgetary constraints.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, you know, you nowadays with all the different types of programmable chips you can do now,
Mm-hmm.
you can do so much more, including having a live screen that plays video, you know, blinking lights, chasing lights, just constant lights. And it's amazing, you know, and having a lithium battery that's the size of a postage stamp, but about, you know, and maybe an eighth of an inch thick, and that'll run all of that for a couple of hours straight.
Right.
So, you know, technology now, technology then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and a lot of stuff we do now for shows has to be still better than it used to be, meaning the finishes and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're doing makeup and stuff, you know, you have to be even more concerned how you're doing your blending on your lines.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas during Next Generation, originally, you had a lot of leeway because your television you were watching it on was only 72 DPI.
Right.
And if you're and maybe 30 frames a second.
Yeah.
More than likely, you know, somewhere between 24 and 30, whatever it is, frames a second. Now you have, you know, 2K, 4K, 6K screens.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, you can look at the pimple on a gnat's butt.
Yeah.
What's that?
You can. Yeah.
And that's, you know, I understand it. It's reasonable. And hence the reason why some shows, when they do makeup, they do a basic makeup, and then in some cases, they CGI over the people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or they'll go in and fix those little seam lines and stuff, you know, in post production to make it look better.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Are there any shows you're working on currently?
I did some work for Bullet Train recently.
Okay.
But a lot of the work I do right now, you know, any show that comes to the door, I'll talk to them and do whatever. But I do a lot of stuff with collectibles companies and and toy companies.
Okay.
You know, doing, you know, we were working with EFX doing the Mandalorian helmets for their production for sales. A bunch of Marvel stuff for them, you know, different things. You know,
yeah.
Whatever comes through the door, you know, or if I have some of my own stuff I want to work on, which, you know, I always do. I'm always trying to make, you know, products and stuff. I have a full line of products I sell through a puppetry supply house and stuff like that. So, and you know, I'm getting ready to start shooting a whole nother slew of my Propology 101 YouTube videos.
Yeah, I saw those. Yeah.
So I'm hoping to get another cache bank of episodes for that I can leisurely go through and edit. So, you know, I'm here every day, no matter what. So I'm always trying to do something, you know, trying to create something, you know, or I'm going through storage to try and find all the parts for X prop to put them all together so that, you know, I have, you know, all the props that are 99% of all the props that are in my Propology 101 videos are part of those are the masters that it was used to make all the originals for the shows. And so that's part of my archive that I'm trying to get everything put into individual boxes so that, eventually it's like, okay, so here's an entire archive of everything you can think of. I'm also doing the same thing with all my photos from Star Trek and other shows. I currently, of all from hard drives that I've found so far, I have condensed everything down as far as Star Trek into my 8 terabyte drive.
Oh wow! You could make a book out of all that.
Well, yes, but that costs money,
right?
And you have to have it approved as a licensed product,
right? Unless you went unofficial.
And
Unless you went unofficial.
Well, yes, but then they can stop you from publish. So I would love to do a series of coffee table books. That's always been kind of the plan that we've wanted to do. It's just all a matter of one, having the time to correlate everything into a book format, and then trying to submit it and find out what that's going to cost license wise, let alone what it's going to cost to do them as a published book. And most of the books that are out there right now, like you could, if you wrote a book about something, you could self-publish it. But you can't do that if it's a licensed book.
Right.
You have to go to specific houses and or publishers to get those books published.
Okay.
And it's not, and once again, eventually it'll come out one way or another.
Right.
But it's just a matter of having it done and having it available, I should say, for it to be done.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that book when it finally comes out. That sounds like it'll be a blast to check out.
It could be. I'm thinking, I could probably do. I'm guessing probably 20 or 30 books, just with the photographs, just on Star Trek. And there's all the other photography from the other shows I've worked on that could also be incorporated into other books, including like a portfolio book. So we'll see,
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
If there's a publisher out there that really wants to do Star Trek books, come see me.
There you go. We'll have them reach out to you for sure. Well, hey, it's been a blast talking to you. I'm really excited that we got to do this. Thank you so much for being part of it. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up or anything you wanted to promote before we get up?
Just the Propology 101 on YouTube. Go in there and subscribe. Take a look at all the videos. Have some fun. I'm open. I'm on Facebook all the time, so I'm open to chat at times on different forums on Facebook.
Yeah. Awesome.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll put a link to Propology in the show notes so people can check that out. And thanks again for being on. It was a pleasure talking to you, Michael.
No problem.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.